Welcome, everyone. I'm Ellen Barton. I'm the president of the local League of Women Voters, the Seattle-King County, and I want to welcome you to our annual ballot issue forum, sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Seattle-King County. The League will soon be entering our 95th year of providing unbiased voter information and lively ballot issue and candidate forums. And tonight is one of them. That's about 5 generations of voters that we have served. And we look forward to serving with traditional tools such as the work of our neighborhood units, which are our grassroots lifeblood. Can we have unit leaders who are present to stand up for just a moment so we can all recognize you? Yay! These ladies, and sometimes gentlemen, lead discussion and study groups all around the county, each month tackling the hot topics of the day and the important issues that we study. While we have pride in our storied history, we also have our eyes focused firmly on the future. Now I can put my glasses on, I can actually read this, but fortunately she made it large enough. So in the future we plan to serve another 5 generations of voters and 5 more after that. Much of our work in the 21st century involves using new and better technologies, like the computer here, to get our messages out to voters, elected officials, policymakers, and our communities. One of our tools, Vote 411, will be described for you at our midway point here tonight. But now, actually, let me make one more announcement before I introduce our moderator. If you look at your program on the back, there's just a small typo. It's about our upcoming fundraiser on November 8th. It doesn't say the 8th. It's not all of November from 5:30 p.m. Every day of November from 5:30 p.m. to 7:30. Oh no, it's November 8th. So without further, and you'll get more information on that, of course, in your weekly emails coming up. But now, without further ado, our moderator for tonight is Julianne Kempf, our King County Voter Services co-chair and former superintendent of elections for King County.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you for your leadership of our organization. And just as a reminder to everyone, I will speak into the mic as soon as I can lean to it. Tonight we are being videotaped for rebroadcast by King County TV, and they will have it up on their website, and we will also link to that, and you are invited also to link to that. So this information will be available throughout this month for all of our voters. And just as a reminder, the League of Women Voters does retain copyrights to the filmed copy of the content of our program. So we discourage little snippets being used out of context, and if somebody tries to do that, the League will come after you. We like showing our speakers in the context they intended. So let me briefly go over the rules of engagement for the evening. The League believes that good people can disagree without being disagreeable, and so we structure our forum so that we can have these kind of conversations. Each of the measures we are discussing will be allowed 2 minutes to make an introduction, where they will give us their best elevator speech. Now, if you haven't heard of an elevator speech, that's the impassioned speech that you make in politics to promote your cause or candidate, but it's a speech that lasts just the duration of the elevator ride with the person you're trying to persuade. So our lovely timekeepers will give a signal when you're down to 30 seconds and 10 seconds, and then we'll signal you when it's time. Now, I'm not going to cut you off mid-sentence or mid-syllable, but please don't try to overrun the timer too much, or I will stop you. And about the questions this evening, we'll start off, as I said, with our introduction, and then we'll have a couple of League-generated questions for each of the panels. You also all have blank cards, I hope, that you were passed out. If you have a question for our panel, please write it down and raise it up in the air, and we'll have somebody come around and get it for you. They'll bring it around up here to me, and I will ask our panel your question. So one thing to remember about the questions, no ad hominem attacks. Don't attack just one person. Ask your question of the whole panel. And please make your questions related to the ballot issue that we're addressing. That happens surprisingly, sometimes not at all. And so here we go. Not surprisingly, we will be discussing Proposition 1 first, because all three propositions in Seattle are Proposition 1. Got to do something about that law. But this is I think, one of the more difficult propositions for voters to really wrap their heads around. It is the Proposition 1A and 1B two-part question that relates to pre-K, early childhood education, and caregiving. So, if we could start with Heather, if you would please introduce yourself and give your best 2-minute elevator speech.
Hi, my name is Heather Weiner. I'm very pleased to be here with the League of Women Voters. I learned how to stuff envelopes at a very young age with a county League of Women Voters. My mother was a member, so I'm very glad to see all of you here tonight. The reason that we have, as citizens, gathered 30,000 signatures to put Prop 1A, which was formerly I-107, on the ballot, was because Seattle is facing a very serious childcare crisis. Childcare is out of reach for many families. A single woman in King County, on average, will pay up to 52% of her income on childcare. Just a few days ago, I was at a childcare center with Kathy Yazzie, who's in the audience here, looking at the rates written on her board. Her center is not the most expensive, but it was but it was $1,445 a month to take care of a child under the age of 18 months. Is that right, Kathy? That's 52% of the average income for a single working woman. As you can imagine, that has tremendous impacts not just on that family or that woman's ability to go back to work, but also on that child's ability to have good, high-quality care. Instead, many children are put into what we call Craigslist care, unlicensed care. The second problem that we have with childcare in Seattle is that the quality of that care is not as good as it should be. There's very high turnover among the teachers. Many teachers are leaving, up to 40% every year, because the pay is so low, between $10 and $14 an hour for people who are taking care of our children. And the last problem that we're facing in Seattle is that the training is haphazard. Unlike many other professions, there is not really a coordinated certification system or ongoing training system for teachers. So what Prop 1A does is it directs the City Council to address the affordability issue by forming a task force, much like what the mayor did with minimum wage. It directs the city to establish a private-public partnership to help train the 4,500 early educators here in the city of Seattle, and it raises the wages of teachers to $15 an hour so that they do not leave for higher paying jobs at Target and McDonald's when that minimum wage increase goes into effect. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Heather. And Bob, if you would go next.
I'm Bob Gilbertson. I'm the CEO of the YMCA of Greater Seattle. And, as kind of an interesting aside to this particular thing, I'm a volunteer for this campaign. And I've spent the last 40 years doing youth development in the YMCA. And so it's been my lifelong career. What I really like about 1B is that it focuses on academic success, and that getting a good start, particularly for pre-K kids, is vital in terms of that. We went on a trip with the mayor and the councilman and members of the union, and all kinds of people were on this trip to Boston and New Jersey and Washington, D.C. to look at some successful programs that are already having good academic outcomes with kids in elementary school and beyond. And what they told us was exactly what we've put into this proposal. And that is, start small and scale up from there, and then do the highest possible quality that you can. Because high quality yields results in academic success for kids later in life. And so anything short of the high quality, it doesn't have the yield. And so we have to do this. And if you look at our schools in Seattle, and you see the failure rate of graduation, and you see other signs of kids not being academically successful, that is a problem. So that's the focus. We know what it's going to cost. There's a levy to do it. And we'll go from 200 kids in the beginning to 2,000 kids in the 4th year. Thanks.
And Melissa, if you would talk about just simply a no vote on the very first part, since we've had 2 yeses.
Good evening. My name is Melissa Westbrook. I'm a public education activist, and I've written this Seattle Schools Community Forum blog for the last 8 years. Preschool, especially for disadvantaged children, is a good thing. We're not going to argue about that. But my opposition stems from 2 main issues. One, these are very detailed and yet confusing propositions. Proposition 1A is less about preschool, more about regulating and training caregivers. Prop 1B has so many moving parts, it's hard to discern how it will work. In many ways, the city and the union seem to be saying to voters, trust us, it's all good. These 2 groups, labor and governance, should have stayed at the table and created a unified proposition. That they did not should give you pause. Number 2, Seattle Schools is an absolute linchpin to the city's plan, 1B. Seattle Schools has a severe space shortage. They installed 30 more portables just this last summer. Some schools are revamping all of their space, including their closets. As well, the state underfunded mandate for Seattle Schools is K-12, not preschool. And we all know from McCleary, we're underfunding K-12 as it is. In fact, the city would be funding a longer day for preschoolers than the state funds for kindergarten. Accordingly then, how can the city ask the school district to give space and resources that they do not have to spare? It's not like the city doesn't already invest. If you voted for Families in Education levy, you voted for preschool because $61 million of the levy already goes to preschool. If we want to spend more on preschool, it's that we need a plan that both labor and governance believes in. That's what I believe, and that's why I'm voting no.
Okay, thank you. And this leads us into our first league question. We do need to be clear about what exactly we're voting for here. Part 1 is not a referendum about whether we like preschool and whether we think it's a good idea, is it?
So you're right, it's a very confusing ballot question. Part 1 says, do you think we should do something to improve preschool, yes or no? Regardless of how you voted on 1, this is like a LSAT question I had to take to get into law school. Then how do you vote, which program do you choose, 1A or 1B? The reason it is set up like this is we got our initiative on the ballot and we were hoping to run a campaign to vote yes, yes on both so that they could be complementary to each other. The city council decided they would offer their pre-K tax levy as a challenge to ours, as an alternative to ours. So that's why we have very confusing language.
Okay, but part 1, I'm looking for a short answer here, folks. That's okay, that's okay, I should have said that. Part 1 is simply, do you wish to enact either of these 2 plans?
That's correct.
Is that correct?
It's not.
It's a qualifier.
It's a qualifier. I'm going to go over the voting in my closing statement, so maybe it'll help you understand even more.
Okay, then of the two proposals at the bottom, does the voter get to know before they vote yes or no on a program which one they potentially will get?
I'm not sure I understand your
Okay,
question.
if you're voting in favor of a proposal, does the voter get to know which of the 2 proposals is going to be enacted if they vote yes?
No.
No.
No. Okay. So, here's the question. What would you say to somebody who supports your position, these are for 1A and 1B, does not support the other program, and is wondering how to vote on the first part? And Heather, you can answer.
We are asking voters to vote yes on the first part and choose Prop 1A.
And we're asking voters to vote yes on the proposition and yes on 1B.
And what would
Well,
you recommend, Melissa?
I would recommend voting no on the first question. Understand, because it's 2 parts, if you vote no on the first part, you don't have to do anything else. But interestingly, the law allows you, if you do vote no, you can go ahead and pick one of those two and hedge your bets over, well, if the yeses win, I'd rather be able to have a choice. It's very strange, but this is what you get to do.
So we're going to start with Bob first on this one. This is going to be a minute and a half answer. And I've lost my question. There has been criticism that the two sides didn't come to the table and fully flesh out a pre-K program. How would you respond to that? And do you think that that is a challenge that is going to have to be faced whichever side wins, if yes prevails or not?
Well, the propositions are really quite different in what they address. And so, you know, the Prop 1B addresses quality pre-K and getting kids ready for academic success. Prop 1A is a more universal view, and it's more about childcare. And so I think that's that's sort of the nuts and bolts of it. And I think that's where if you stand with me and you believe that young people have to have academic success and we got too many people failing later in school, then that's 1B, because that's what is addressed with high quality pre-K. So I think that's the issue.
And we're going to go next to Heather, a minute and a half.
The question was, why weren't the two sides able to negotiate an agreement? And neither Bob nor I were in the room. Were you there, Bob? No. But I remember having phone calls on Mother's Day where women who are teachers were going into those rooms, and I know one of those women is here in our audience today. And what they have told me is that the big question that was left on the table was, what do we do? That's great what we're doing for those 2,000 kids, but what do we do for the other 28,000 children in our city under the age of 5? What are we going to do for them to improve their quality of care and the affordability for them? And what the city said was, we want to keep the scope very small and do this pilot pre-K program administered by the city. We said we want to look at the larger scope of the problem and improve care at all the existing centers. And we went forward with a ballot initiative hoping that we could have a yes, yes. Unfortunately, we lost in court. We lost again in state Court of Appeals. We just had our further appeal denied today. So here we are on the ballot, being forced by the city to oppose 1B. It's an unfortunate situation, but that's where we are.
And Melissa, would you have a response to what they said about whether they should have stayed longer at the table?
Mine is a short response that I've already said. I just fully believe that if you really want the best possible outcome to a program, it would be best to have labor and governance having worked together, bring one unified voice to voters, and I would say in Seattle it would almost be a slam dunk. They didn't do that, and in my mind, I think that that is the most vital thing to make it a success.
The next question is, and we'll start with Heather, minute and a half. Do you think it's going to... Yeah.
I had about 30 seconds left, I think, on my thing. Let me just finish this 1 second. And that is, it came out in the last hearing, debate, whatever it was, that the 2 points that seemed to be the sticking points in this negotiation that neither of us were present in is the training center and who was going to operate the training center, and then who was going to represent child care workers in the city of Seattle. And so I think the union took the position that it had to be the union in both of those, and exclusively the union, not anyone else. And I think that was the breaking point. Sorry.
Did I have extra time? Okay, great. One of the sticking points, indeed, is a professional development institute. We have seen many public-private partnerships, even here in Washington State, where the unions and management and healthcare facilities join together in a public-private partnership, lobby Olympia for $11 million to help train healthcare staff so that they have ongoing training. That's what we're proposing. Our hope is with 1A, we can go to Olympia, we can go to Washington, D.C., and bring back money to help our child care providers.
Now, the two different proposals are very different, but starting with Heather this time in a minute and a half, is it a problem or is it potentially a benefit that the Seattle Public Schools are not heavily involved in either of the two proposals?
The two proposals are very different. I can speak for 1A, and I think Melissa probably could speak much better to the public schools angle. Right now, we have 750 licensed child care centers in the city of Seattle, 750, and they serve about 22,000 children under the age of 5. At those licensed centers, there's a mix. Many of them are in-home centers. You see the sign sometimes driving in your neighborhood of a child care center. Those in-home centers are privately owned. It's typically a woman. Many of them are women of color. They make very small profits at those. Sometimes they don't make any profit. They are just running a child care center in their home. The second form of a center is like the center that we have here in the church that you might have seen at the parking lot, where they're using a church facility or up in Crown Hill, using the old neighborhood center as a child care facility. What we have heard is that the public schools don't have any room right now, and that's one of the reasons why we are saying let's go with the existing facilities, the existing child care centers, improve those centers, and work with the teachers who are there right now instead of reinventing the wheel.
And Bob, how would you respond to that?
Well, a little bit similar in the sense that a lot of pre-K work that's being done now is being done outside the school system. The school system has some pre-K work that they're doing, and they'll have some pre-K work going forward in this. But they do have limited space, and what's happening is they're getting more and more students, and they're not building bigger schools. So they have a squeeze going on, but it doesn't mean that quality programs like offered here in the church and other places in the community couldn't do a great job. We saw that in New Jersey. We saw that in Boston. It happens in Denver. So it's going to be a mix. Pre-K, quality pre-K isn't limited to being done in the school. It can be done in a lot of different places, and in Seattle, at least initially, we know it's going to be done in the community.
And a minute and a half, Melissa.
Well, just to understand a couple of things about putting a preschool into a school. Preschools have to have their own restrooms for those children. They have to have their own playground space. So you're trying to find space. The reason that it is so concerning to me is every single thing that the City Council voted on, every single piece of literature says their priority is to have a partnership with the school district, to have space. If you think about it, every neighborhood has a school. That's the most logical place that you would find space. And so the other issue, too, is that if you have the preschool in Seattle schools, you would not have, the schools district does not have to follow all the rules and regulations as if it was a private building. And so it would be much easier and much cheaper for the city to be in the school district. As somebody who watches over this school district, I can tell you I have seen the pressure from the city on the school district right now, even though they say it would be voluntary. I think that the city is being a little disingenuous on that point because, for example, the school district used money to send 5 people on this trip that Mr. Gilbertson was on, and it's money that really we didn't have to spare.
Okay, I didn't see any cards come up from the audience, so we have one coming up. And we're hurrying. Well, while it's coming up, if we could get 3 of our delightful gift bags ready.
I don't know, does that qualify as paid?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. All right, it looks like we had a little bit of a snafu here. The cards were supposed to go up in the air and go back through our panel. So what I'd like to ask of our panel is if we sent you a questionnaire of our questions, would you be willing to give short answers to them and we can post them on our website? That'd be terrific, and that way we can make sure everybody's questions are answered. And so we're right at 7:30. We're going to go ahead and give you each 2 minutes for your closing speech, and we'll start with Melissa this time.
The City Council has just taken on the business of running our parks, and now they want to take on a citywide preschool program. I'm not sure I believe that they have the bandwidth and the expertise for another major endeavor. Prop 1 has no funding. Does anybody here really believe that if Prop 1 wins, the city's going to rush to give them the money? I don't. Prop 1 has a one-size-fits-all curriculum. They will not be allowing Montessori or Waldorf as part of their curriculum, and children are not one-size-fits-all. It's also top-heavy with administrators, with salaries for teachers being between $30,000 and $60,000, but for administrators being between $100,000 and $200,000. I think the money should be in the classroom. As we explained about the voting already, you know, you can vote for either measure. You can vote no on the first question and then walk away from there. But again, if you do vote no, you are allowed to pick between the two. And as I heard somebody in the audience say, it could either be your favorite or the lesser of two evils. In closing, 1B likes to say that this is a free preschool for low-income families, but I ask you to think of another group of people in this city, and that's the taxpayers. We are generous folks in the city. We fund parks, libraries, emergency services, and public education. But both of these measures aim to help low-income families, but we have to think about the tax burden for the entire city. There are people on fixed incomes, like elderly people, and I believe as voters, we have to think carefully about what we approve and not just say yes because it's for the kids. I ask you to consider voting no and sending the City Council and the unions back to the table for an authentic effort that voters can both give the thumbs up to. Thank you.
And Bob?
So I'm going to ask you to vote for the kids. This city votes for kids all the time, and I'm going to ask you to do it again. And I think what it does is it gives us a foothold into a strategy that works and that'll help kids be academically successful and begin to reduce the inequities that we have right now in education in our community. It's vital that we begin to do this. This is a small start, but it gets to 2,000 kids, and as time goes on, what's going to happen is there will be resources from the state and the federal level that'll help shore this up, and we'll have additional resources to expand it as we go forward. But we need to get started on it. It can be done in the community. The school system is with us. They're not against us on this. They're with us. This benefits their academic success. So there's not a principal in the school district that doesn't want kids from this program to go to their school. This is a really important and exciting opportunity. You should go to Boston, go to Denver, go to New Jersey, and see what they've done in terms of really getting kids on fire about academics. We saw kids in classrooms. They were curious. They were asking questions. It was a process of learning that was going on in preschool classrooms, and it's exciting. It's something that has lasting value all the way through academic life for these kids. So please, let's vote for kids this time. Thank you.
And Heather, your closing 2 minutes.
I want to answer some questions that I imagine that you might have had. One question you might have asked about Prop 1A was how much does it cost and where does the funding come from? By our estimates, the mandates in Prop 1A would cost the city about $3 million a year. That's for forming the task force to look at affordable care. That is for establishing a training institute. And the rest of the money could come from many of the same places that Bob has just described. It would enable us to apply for federal, state, and private grant monies, for example, to train teachers on the best way to prevent crib death and to educate other parents about the best ways to prevent crib death. There's a whole range of things that we could help educate our 4,500 early educators in the city about. The second question you might have asked is, who are behind these two different initiatives? And the groups that have endorsed Prop 1A include the NAACP of Seattle-King County. It includes Senator Marilyn Chase, Senator Bob Hasagawa, other elected state representatives. It is, of course, endorsed by SEIU and the American Federation of Teachers, and it is endorsed by hundreds upon hundreds of mostly women who are providing care to our children right now, early educators, and there's pictures of a lot of them on our board over there. The people who have, I'm not going to criticize 1B on its merits, but I will say that the people who have endorsed 1B include the Chamber of Commerce and many organizations that were pushing for charter schools, if you remember I-1240, and also is funded largely by the people who are behind charter schools and 1240, and also the people who helped to defeat the higher earner income tax here in our state, which both of those measures were supported by people in Seattle. Charter schools was defeated in Seattle by 60%. The high earner income tax was supported by Seattle by 63%. So I don't want to criticize 1B on its merits, but I will say take a look at where the funding and the support is coming from. And I hope you'll vote for Prop 1A. Thank you.
Thank you to all three of you. We have a website for more information for each of the three campaigns printed in your program, and we have a little gift for each of you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. I'm sitting next to you.
Thank you.
And they've all just whispered to me that they look forward to answering our questions. So we will have those printed up, get them out, and put them on our website with the streaming video. So now we have K-12 class size and staffing. If we could have Mary Howes and Chad Magandance. Okay, and just a quick note about our cards. Remember, if you have a question, write it on your card and hold it up. We've got some specific people designated to take them back to the back of the room where they are putting them in order for me. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Just put your hand up and they'll bring you a card. Well, now we're going to move to State Initiative 1351, which is the one that deals with K through 12 class size and staffing. And this measure would place limitations on what the size of class size could grow to. And we do have our ballot summaries at the back of the room for everybody. And we will start out with, actually, let me introduce Mary Howes, who is representing Class Size Counts Washington, and Representative Chad Magandance, who's the ranking member of the House Education Committee, who will be discussing the no position on 1351. And so, Mary, we are going to start with your elevator speech, your best 2-minute pitch on yes on 1351.
Great, thank you. So I'm Mary Howes. I am the mother of 4 boys, so I always welcome the opportunity to say, good luck, Dad, get them to bed tonight on your own. I have 4 boys in public schools. I'm a former Washington State teacher, and I am the sponsor of Initiative 1351, which would reduce class sizes for all Washington students. I don't know if you know this, but right now we are 47th in the nation in class size. That means Washington students are in some of the most crowded classrooms in the nation. What this initiative does is it simply takes the state's own bipartisan recommendations and puts them into law. And what that would do is it would change class sizes on average for grades K through 3 to 17 students, and on average in grades 4 through 12 to 25 students. If those numbers sound kind of pie in the sky to you, I want to point out that that makes us about average in the nation. So we go from 47th to probably around 26. So this just gives you an indication of how bad things have become, and really that our students deserve to be at least on par, I think, with where the rest of the nation is. In 2 minutes, I wish I could tell you all the stories that I've heard from parents and students around the state. Many have gone to our website and shared their stories. But it's truly alarming to hear about 30 or more students in a kindergarten class with one teacher where they're trying to learn the most basic skills, or people in advanced science or math classes in high school, in some cases even over 40 students. So I believe that every child, regardless of where they live, what language they speak, their economic background, they deserve to learn and succeed in an uncrowded classroom, and that's why I'm supporting Initiative 1351.
Mr. Magandance.
So I agree with a lot of what she said. reducing class size makes sense. It's something I wish we could do in every classroom. I'd love to have individualized instruction. But if something makes sense like this, why is it that the largest newspapers in Seattle, Tacoma, and Spokane are coming out against this? Well, it's because it doesn't come for free. It has an opportunity cost. One of the things that the Supreme Court embraced with the McCleary decision was a holistic approach to improving our schools. It includes all-day kindergarten, K through 3 class size enhancements, materials, curriculum, additional class time, additional credit hours, increasing the rigor of our schools across the board. This is basically taking all the money that we would put into everything and put it into one thing. And the opportunity cost is great, not just to our educational system, but for all the social services that would be cannibalized in that process as well. So let's just take a look at the cost. OFM, a nonpartisan staff down in Olympia, they came back with the cost estimates at $4.7 billion. Now, just to put that in a frame of reference, everything we spend on education is about $15 billion. So $4.7 billion, and that's just to the state. It doesn't include the $1.9 billion to school districts, because we got a lot of classrooms for all those new teachers that we don't have right now. So even assuming we could hire 7,500 new teachers, and don't forget the 17,000 new staff members and 1,000 additional central administrators that are part of this bill, we don't have the room for them. And we would have to pass bonds in every local school district to be able to create that classroom size to put those teachers in. And so I ask you to consider the opportunity cost. Is this a good thing to do? Yes. Is it everything we should be doing? No. And we need to be sensitive to where our limited resources can be put to have the maximum impact for kids.
Well, for our first question, we're just simply going to address the elephant in the room, and that is the McCleary ruling. And as we all know, the legislature is walking into session next spring with a mandate by the courts to fully fund basic education in the state of Washington. How is, if 1351 is passed, how is this going to intertwine with what the legislature is already tasked with doing? And you're going to get 2 minutes to answer this one. Mr. McInnes.
It would be devastating. I'm working on these four-corner meetings where we have representatives from each caucus in each chamber, and I got to be honest, this is scaring the pants off us. Everything we're doing is in the $2 to $4 billion range, and to have $4.7 billion of additional funding that we'd have to put into class size. Now keep in mind that $1.38 billion has already been set aside for kindergarten through third grade, where the biggest benefits are gained. In fact, the Washington State Institute for Public Policy, a nonpartisan research arm of the legislature, had a report published last year that showed that, looking at 53 independent studies, the drop-off was dramatic for student gains at third grade. So if you invest early in kindergarten, first grade, with that individualized attention, you get a big return on investment. At third grade, the chances of a net positive outcome is actually 55%, where 50% is flipping a coin. We need to be sensitive to where we can put our money for the maximum effect for kids. We need to be looking at additional classroom time, salaries. We need to be looking at summer engagement programs. Even performance pay ranks much higher at third grade and beyond. And so we really need to be looking at all these solutions and pick the ones that have the biggest return on investment and be very thoughtful about this process rather than just a one-size-fits-all solution.
And Mary, 2 minutes.
Sure. First of all, I think everybody should understand that McCleary is about fully funding our schools, and the state was found to be failing to fully fund our schools. And there's absolutely no way that if we were fully funding our schools, we would be 47th in the nation in class size. So this is an essential part of McCleary. It's also important to note that these numbers came from the state as part of their defense during that Supreme Court hearing. They established a bipartisan council, they brought in experts, and they said, this is what it takes to staff a prototypical school. These are the staff you need to have in order to provide adequate education for students. And so this is just what the state said you should do, and it's what they said they would do, but they still have not done it. So this is not on top of McCleary, this is an essential part of it. And the state needs to fully fund schools by 2018. I understand your concern, but you kind of remind me of the student, and I have one of these as a son who's kind of put off a major project until it's pretty close to the due date. And now they're panicked, right? And so instead of tackling it and really dealing with the issue, they start to say, well, I don't think this piece really needs to be done. I don't think we have to do this. I think we can take out that. And I'm going to just choose the parts that are easier for me to do instead of choosing something that's really essential. And class size benefits every kid. To me, it's very, very basic. You can do all kinds of other things as well, but in order to give every kid a fair shot, you have to put them in a classroom where they can get a reasonable amount of attention. And, you know, the benefits are beyond third grade. I think that it's, again, just common sense. We want our kids to compete in a global economy. The world of technology and math and science has changed. We need to make sure that our kids are prepared for college and get that attention they need in middle school and high school.
A few seconds left. Could I respond to it?
I'm going to give each of you 20 seconds to rebut.
Oh, perfect. So the Quality Education Council, I'm actually on the Quality Education Council, and I can tell you that that proposal, it was a number submitted by OSPI, we considered to be a wish list. And it was something that we knew was irresponsible to fund at that level, and so it got put in the appendix. There is nothing binding or blessed about this report. In fact, the fact that it was relegated to the last few pages, I think, speaks volumes.
I completely disagree. I think that you are doing a disservice to the work that people put into that report. It's in the appendix because that's where you put all your tables and charts with the numbers. But this was a recommendation that was made. This was a recommendation that was the defense of the state. And again, I understand you weren't part of it when it was created, but these are good common sense recommendations that, again, just make us average in the nation.
I like that.
And here's our first question from the audience. What happened to the similar initiative that was passed several years ago? We'll give 45 seconds on this one. Mary.
So I think you're referring to Initiative 728, which was passed. It did not cover K-12 class size. It was just primary grades. It was also could be used for some other things. I am not a legislature, so I might be getting my dates wrong, but I was a teacher when this happened. So it was initially passed into law, initially funded, and then I believe it was suspended and then ultimately repealed by the legislature. So that is gone, and the staff that it hired have not been replaced.
And the problem with 728 is that it was an unfunded mandate. It had no money attached to it. That's the problem here again. I've learned that people want everything and nobody wants to pay for it. And maybe that's just kind of a cynical view, but we have to make those tough decisions. We have to recognize that the state has limited resources. And particularly with McCleary, we need to make sure that whatever solution we come up with isn't put on a referendum ballot in November and totally, the worst thing possible was if we have a solution for McCleary, it fails by referendum and we're back to square one. So we have to be the responsible adults in this situation, just like you're all doing at home, and we have to recognize we have limited resources and we need to put them where they have the maximum effect for kids.
Well, now we hear a lot, this is also from the audience, we hear a lot about Washington students ranking 47th in class size, which of course is a challenge. Where do Washington students rank in test performance compared to other states?
Well, it depends on which test you look at. The NAEP scores, which are basically the national scores that we can use apple-to-apple comparisons, we actually do quite well. Our bang for the buck, if you want to think of it in that perspective, is quite high. For what we spend on education, we get very good results. If you look at our SAT scores, of all of these states that have the number of people participating in the SATs like we do extremely well. And so from a performance perspective, we've been improving. But then if you look historically at the student-teacher ratios, they've been declining regularly since the 40s. In fact, since the 40s, it's dropped 40%. Statistically, we had much larger classes than our kids. Now, you can always find an instance where that may not be true, but we've been making improvements. And the $1.38 billion we have already dedicated in state statute by 2018 to reduce class sizes further is going to improve that situation even more.
And Mary.
Yeah. It is true that class sizes are not the same as they were in the 40s, but our students are not the same as they were in the 40s, and our expectations are much, much higher. I think our teachers do an amazing job under the circumstances, but again, we're talking about struggling students, often students who are English language learners, students that come from high poverty. Class size addresses all of that. And I think we do the best we can, but it's not sustainable. And I worry. A couple years ago, I was in a high poverty school where I had 31 fifth graders. 40% of my students were English language learners. High poverty school where we packed backpacks of foods to send home on the weekend so they could eat. And I tell you, beyond test scores, what those kids need are positive relationship with adults. And they often only get that in schools. And it's really hard to establish those relationships when they're in a crowded classroom.
Thank you. This also comes from our audience. This is a very interesting question. It appears from reading 1351 that 2/3 of the additional staff would be non-teachers. Now, is that true of the present situation? And is that actually accurate? Is the perception accurate?
I'd have to look at the current ratios, but it is 17,000 new classified, 1,000 central administration compared to 7,500 teachers. So it's a little ironic in my mind that we've got a class size initiative that's really putting more outside of the class than inside of the classroom.
Yeah, I think that's a bit misleading. Again, these numbers didn't come from me, they came from the state, so they do have all the staffing recommendations. What Representative Magendas is doing is he's subtracting out the K through 3 teachers because he says that the state will address class sizes for K3. I hope they do, but they haven't done it yet. So you need to add back in the K3 teachers. Also, a lot of these positions, I think most of us would consider educators. These are teacher librarians, school counselors, instructional aides that work directly with students. And so it's really, most of these positions are instructional positions that work directly with kids. When you add in the K3 and you add in the teacher librarians, the counselors, and so forth, it's about 15,000 new teachers phased in over 4 years. And yes, we didn't pick and choose on the recommendations. We think that, it makes sense that there's probably one school safety officer per high school, as was recommended in the wake of, the violence that we've seen. We didn't take that out. So there are some positions, but by and large, this is focused on class size and students.
Well, your answer leads us right into the next question from our audience. Now, can class size be addressed by an adult-to-student ratio as opposed to having to have a teacher-to-student ratio?
However you want to go.
We'll start with Mary.
They don't know how much time, and I don't either.
Oh, I'm sorry, 1 minute.
1 minute, yeah. I think ideally we do want lower class sizes, and that's the first step. But what I like about this initiative is it is flexible, and it does recognize that there are places, and Seattle is one of them, where they don't have the physical space to reduce class sizes. So there's another misleading thing about the cost. There's nothing in this initiative that requires you to build more classrooms, and it says that if you don't have the physical space to lower class sizes, the state will still provide the funds for school-based personnel that work directly with students. So the goal of this initiative is to get more caring, qualified adults working with fewer students so they get the attention they need. So this could look like 2 kindergarten teachers in a group of 30, which isn't ideal, but it's better than 1 by themselves. Or it could be used to hire instructional aides or additional support, or maybe a specialist who comes in and pulls out small groups of kids and does reading instruction with them. So that flexibility is in this initiative.
So we have this provision in most of our school district contracts, and I was president of the Issaquah School Board, and so I tend to look at those 17,000 kids whenever I'm looking for an example. One of the provisions in our contract was called overload. So basically, every district has targets for their class sizes, and if you have too many kids in a particular class, maybe because enrollment was unpredictable at that point, the teachers have an option of picking between an additional bonus or an additional person, a paraeducator to have in that classroom for assistance. Guess how many teachers picked an additional person? None of them. They took the bonus. And it really highlights that there are some significant problems that we have with teacher compensation right now. In high cost of living areas like Seattle, We have a single salary schedule for the entire state, and yet cost of living in King County is median household income in King County is $68,000 a year, whereas in Eastern counties like Whitman County, it's $32,000 a year. We need to address this problem first and make sure that we're paying a competitive wage for every teacher. And if we do this class size initiative, we're not going to have the funds to do that.
Okay, this is a question that maybe the two of you as experts can clarify for us. Does McCleary just address K through 3? And does 1351 address the whole K through 12 spectrum, or is that inaccurate? And we'll start with Mr. Magandance.
So McCleary talks to two items, adequacy and equity. And so it doesn't get into specific recommendations, but what they did is they latched on to a plan that we had proposed from the Basic Education Finance Task Force that was enacted in 2261 and then later in following bills like 2776. And they latched onto that as a model for what they believe would address as a remedy what they needed for satisfying the McCleary case. And so that actually came from within the legislature. And so the legislature was guided by this research that showed that the biggest benefits, significantly more in kindergarten through third grade, which is why we focused on that $1.38 billion to reduce class sizes where it mattered most.
So I think it's important to distinguish between what the legislature wants to do and what McCleary says. McCleary says that the state has failed to fully fund education. It's the paramount duty of the state to fully fund education, fully fund it. And again, our initiative does address K-12, just as McCleary addresses K-12. And Representative Magendas is correct. McCleary is not a list of items with price tags and you just pick them and you've satisfied it. It's about what does full funding look like. And I think there's just, again, no way that we can say we're fully funding our schools and meeting our constitutional obligation and not dealing with this class size issue and letting our students be in some of the most crowded classrooms in the nation. There's nothing in this initiative that prohibits you from doing other things. I'm a big supporter of other things, including increasing teacher pay. It just simply makes sure that class size is addressed when we comply with McCleary.
Okay, let's say you have 40 students in a 50-minute lecture-style class in high school. So essentially the teacher has 1 minute, 3 seconds per student each educational day. What kind of problems does that bring up, and what kind of what kind of problems does that create? And is that as much of a problem at the high school level as it is at the elementary school level? And we'll start with Mary.
Yeah. I'm a former middle school teacher, so this is a big reality. And I think it's common sense that yes, it provides problems because there's only so much time and attention you can give to students. The part that really concerns me is the kids that are not going to wait in line to talk to you after class, the kids who are not going to keep their hand up until you can get to them, the kids that struggle quietly. To me, that's the shame of what we're doing with class sizes, is that there are kids who just kind of quietly suffer and we don't get to them, that we're not paying attention to them. And it forces the teachers sometimes to make choices about what we can do. I had to oftentimes choose not to do certain science labs out of safety, or out of a lack of materials, or out of a lack of having other people help. So I think it's very important in secondary, and I think we cheat our students by not addressing this problem.
So I have a father who's a public school teacher and a sister who's a public school teacher. There's a very big difference between high school and elementary school. My father actually, as a music teacher, got to work in all three arenas, and you could really get a feel for the difference. When you're in high school, there is a certain maturity that's expected out of the students, and you're really preparing many of them for college, where they're going to be in lecture halls, and that kind of an environment is actually good preparation for their higher education experience. But really, I would love to have individualized instruction in high school. That would be great. But you have to get to the opportunity cost again. Where do you think the state's appetite is now for large tax increases? We're talking about $5 billion here, and that's not even including the local portion. Do you think the state will pass $5 billion in new taxes? I don't think so. So I think that has to cannibalize something else. So mental health, homelessness, health, how are we feeding kids in poverty? These are all very important things too. And what we've been able to do, okay.
Well, the next question is going to follow on to that. The general figure that's been reported as the price tag on this measure would be $5 billion. Now, is that just in addition to what would have to be spent for McCleary, or are some of the requirements of McCleary already going to cost that kind of money? And about how much of that $5 billion do we think, if that is the case?
So the $1.38 billion is not included in that $4.7 billion assessment from the Office of Financial Management. So, and Mary said that that's not committed, but it is enacted legislation. It's state statute right now. In order to not spend that $1.38 billion, we would have to pass a law saying we're not going to do that. And that's about as good a guarantee as you get in the legislature. There's really nothing more solid than that sort of a constitutional amendment. And so that $1.38 billion is already committed. It would be 4.7 on top of that.
Mary?
So absolutely every part of this initiative can count towards the McCleary obligation. It's not like there's some of this is, some of it isn't. It's all about fully funding our schools. All of this can be counted. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is phased in over 4 years. There's time, there's budget cycles to address this issue. And it is not going to get less expensive when we're 48th or 49th or 50th in the nation in class size. At some point we have to say enough is enough and address this issue. Half of my children, half my boys will never see the benefit of this. McCleary is taking a long time, and it's not happening. In fact, billions have been cut from education since the McCleary decision. So I don't think we should keep cutting kids and pitting them against social services. I think it's time that we advocate for the whole child and that we do what's right.
Thank you both, and we're going to have our final wrap-up, and we'll start with Mr. Magandans and go to Mary Howes. We have 2 minutes to persuade us to your position.
Well, I'd like to thank Mary because I know that she's in a tough position. Teachers have a tough job right now. I hear regularly from my family members that that's definitely the case. I would like to do everything. I really would. But I think a more honest and transparent version of this initiative would include the costs and have some means of funding that, because I don't think there's an appetite for $4.7 billion in new taxes to pay for this. I don't think there's an appetite locally for districts to raise $1.9 billion in order to create the classroom space. So we're forced into these tough trade-offs. I get that the teachers union is putting a lot of money into this initiative and making sure it passes. I'll use Mary's number, 15,000 new teachers at an average of $1,000 in membership dues every year. That's $15 million in revenue that the teachers union is looking at. It makes complete sense for them to be throwing full support behind this initiative. But for those of us who are looking at the broader picture and really putting the students first, for those of us like the Seattle Times, the Tacoma News Tribune, the Spokane Spokesman Review, we're looking at a much bigger picture that involves appropriate trade-offs to make given the fact that we have limited resources. It's not just enough to do something that's good. We have to do something that's best. What works best right now? And more now than ever before, we've been able to quantify that. If you go to the Washington State Institute for Public Policy site, you can look at the return on investment for all the things that we're considering doing as part of McCleary, and you can see what ranks higher than class size reduction for third grade and beyond. Just about everything. This is a very low return on investment when you get into fourth grade and beyond. And so I want to be more deliberate, I want to be more thoughtful about the limited resources we have and make sure that we invest them for the maximum effect for kids.
Thanks. This is absolutely about putting kids first. I am not hearing anyone who says it's good to have larger class sizes, that this is, we're proud to be 47th in the nation in class size. I just hear criticisms and costs and apparently now attacks on the educators that work directly with students. I haven't met a teacher or a parent who says they support lower class sizes because it increases members for the Washington Education Association. That's not what people care about. What they care about are kids, and they care about giving kids the attention they need and deserve. It's wrong to pit kids against social services. When bridges collapse, when there's problems, we figure out a way. But when it comes to funding education, we just make excuses, and it's just gone on too long, and I think it's time to change it. I think it's a terrible message to send to kids that money is more important than them. And I think it's really defies common sense that we think we could do something that would be better than giving kids the attention they need and deserve, and giving those connections they need and deserve with adults so that they can, in many cases, break the cycle of poverty and become wonderful, productive citizens. I mean, that's the promise of public education, and the more we cut it and the more we limit it, the more we cut and limit our students. So I urge you to really put kids first and think about how funding has gone in this state for education. And I think this initiative just ensures that we don't keep going backwards, that we really do address what we want for kids. You'll see it in every brochure for preschool, private school, and college. We know class size makes a difference. We know that it's important, and I urge you to vote yes on Initiative 1351.
Thank you both for a very lively conversation.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
And what's in the little swag bags we're giving to our speakers is our wonderful limited edition League of Women Voters mug. Just Abigail. No chocolate. I know. Well, Abigail's coming up here, and you're going to see that Abigail is alone and bereft, but we'll remedy that shortly.
I'm all right with that.
I'm going to speak very briefly about Vote 411, which is a project of the League of Women Voters nationally. It's being done in every state, and it is an online voter's guide. And it's also a portal for people to be able to register to vote and to transfer their voter registration. It is vote, V-O-T-E, 411.org. That's the whole website. And when you get there, click on Individual Voter's Guide and follow the clicks through, put in your address, and you'll be able to see what your candidates in your specific district have said about their positions on the important issues of our day. And we're very excited to be partnering with the National League and the State League to bring you a vigorous online voter guide for King County. Next up, we have Seattle Transportation Proposition 1. What a surprise that it would be numbered Proposition 1. And we have an interesting situation. There is no organized campaign for no. So Abigail is here to tell us a little bit about Seattle Transportation Proposition 1. And lest Abigail think that she was going to get off too easily, I do have a statement from an individual who has a thoughtful, progressive point of view with some concerns about Proposition 1. So I'll pull that out while, Abigail, if you could give us your 2-minute best elevator speech as to why we should vote for Transportation Proposition 1.
Yes, talk about a confusing ballot. My name is Abigail, and I am a transit rider and the campaign manager for Transportation Proposition 1. This is the last item on the ballot also, so after 4 Prop 1s, we're at the very end of the ballot, so I'm going to ask all of you in the room, all of you watching on whatever television screen you are, to make it to the end of your ballot at the very least. So this measure is very exciting, and one of the most important things we are going to do on the ballot this year. It is the first step to get the transit we need in the city of Seattle. Seattle is the fastest growing city in the country, and we don't have a transit system that is meeting the needs of our city. We were facing cuts in April, and fortunately, King County has found a solution to prevent cuts in the city, which we are all really, really happy about. But that means we now have the opportunity to be expanding transit service in the city. For the first time in 8 years, we'll be able to use any of this excess revenue for expanding transit in the city. So I'll walk through what that means. We prioritized in this measure 3 things. First is addressing overcrowding buses. There are 16 routes that the city and county have identified as chronically overcrowded, and I have been on probably all of those buses, so that means they would add bus service to these routes. Next, they would add bus service to chronically unreliable routes, and third, they would add bus routes for more frequent service. This is funded through a vehicle licensing fee and a 0.1% sales tax. And the reason we chose this route is because we need bus service in the city, and Seattle voters supported this measure and this funding source by 66% in April.
Okay, I'm going to read the no on Proposition 1 essay, and then Abigail, I'm going to give you an opportunity to rebut some of the points in it. And this author is a progressive author. There are really 2 different directions that con voters, when we did our research, are coming from. You, of course, have your folks who are pretty against taxes in any form, and they have the usual arguments about higher taxes. But this was a very thoughtful, progressive argument. The county had no other options for fixing a severe funding crisis, but the City Council, acting as the city's legislative body or as the Seattle Transportation Benefit District, had a number of other funding sources available to them, some of which did require a vote of the people. Although they heard from many citizens through public comments, City Council meetings, and rallies that the proposed sales tax increase will be a further burden on low-income residents who are struggling to live in Seattle right now. Even our own board members, this is a progressive group, when polled earlier this year, supported other less regressive options for this measure. Council members Licata and Sawant proposed an alternative proposal which would have raised $21 million per year through an increase in the commercial parking tax and a restoration of the employee hours tax, which would have asked businesses to pay their fair share of the burden. Keep in mind that nearly 40% of downtown employees travel to or from work by transit, so it is the employer's benefit to ensure excellent transit service in our city. The Licata-Sawant proposal would not require a vote of the people and can be implemented if a no vote is what is successful on the proposal currently before us. Finally, while there is no question that the proposed cuts to transit service will have serious effects on the countywide network, this proposal does nothing to address those cuts. While some neighborhoods in Seattle could see critical service protected by this citywide measure, some transit advocates believe that the restructure proposed for the outlying areas that are closer to neighborhoods that may lie outside of Seattle will actually continue to have reduced service over what the rest of the city will have. Bottom line, we in the city of Seattle just rallied to increase the minimum wage for the least fortunate among us, and we want to turn around and make those same workers who are most dependent upon transit service pay the burden of the sales tax increase. These people also are likely to have jobs, more likely to have jobs that are at hours that transit does not serve. Therefore, a car is a necessity for their transportation as opposed to an option. These are the wrong funding sources, and our elected leaders can do better. They can do so quickly and without a vote. Please say no in November and ask them to reconsider having businesses pay their fair share. It's simply the right thing to do. So, Abigail.
Would you like me to rebut this?
I would like you to, would you like me to pick out various points so it's a little easier?
No, I think I took notes, so I think I'm ready to
great.
go. So first and foremost, this is the first step to get the transit we need in Seattle. We also recognize that we need a long-term solution from our leaders around the state to step up. But we need to act immediately because we need transit service in this city. We are growing fast, and we also need to place pressure on our legislators statewide and locally and tell them and send them a message that we care about transit, and this is something that is important to all of us. For low-income people, for seniors, for young people, for anyone getting to work, it is a vital service in our city. One thing I didn't mention earlier that is really, really important and part of this measure that I value a lot is this is a $60 vehicle licensing fee with a $20 low-income rebate, and also there will be $2 million in this measure that will be invested in doing outreach and expanding opportunities for King County's new $1.50 low-income fare. We also have, I understand concerns about the regressive nature of this measure, and we know Seattle voters support this measure, which is why we took this route. We have the support of actually both council members Sawant and Licata, who he mentioned in this article. They do support this measure and want to make sure it's passed because transit is such a vital service in the city. Other organizations like the Seattle Human Services Coalition, King County Coalition on the Homelessness, One America, the Transit Riders Union, Puget Sound Sage, and did I say One America? Yes. And One America are incredible social justice allies on this work. This is an incredibly important measure, and we need support of the city of Seattle to pass it. And then in terms of a regional solution, I agree. We do need a regional solution, and it sounds like now King County has preserved cuts, but we need more. We need regional leaders to come together and ensure that we're stepping up on transit altogether, and that's the message this measure will send.
Okay. Now, this is a terrific question. How would the Seattle Transportation Benefit District add bus routes when aren't the numbers of bus routes and frequency controlled by Metro, which is a county agency, not a City of Seattle agency?
Yeah, so this is a great question. So through an interlocal agreement, the City of Seattle will buy bus service from King County Metro. And I think this is a great opportunity for Seattle to stabilize our transit service. We know what our needs are, and we know we need more service. So this is our opportunity to hold the county accountable to make sure that we have this transit service available for us.
Okay, now, just for clarification, in fairness, this is a $60 increase, right? And there is already a $20. Is that accurate?
So you can answer if you'd like. So this will be a $60 increase in your vehicle licensing fee. If you are oops, sticker in my hair. If you are low income, you can qualify. You can check a part on your box and get a $20 rebate on that fee. There is an expiring congestion reduction fee from King County. So that expired in June. So if you paid your vehicle licensing fee in April, it will be a $40 increase in what you paid last year.
Okay. And this is a question from the audience. Car owners do not support this measure because of the $60 increase. What do you say to them?
I am a car owner as well, and I think anyone who drives in Seattle knows there's a lot of traffic, and it is hard to get around. So the more people we get on buses, the less cars there are on the road, and the easier it is for anyone on a bus, anyone in a car to get around the city. And I think that's a worthwhile investment to make sure that we keep the city moving and keep this region moving.
Okay, and this is one fresh off the press here. Hasn't Metro already cut several key bus routes in Seattle? Does the recent council decision put those back or just prevent more?
Yep.
So did we just put our finger in the dike, or are we actually going to get back the service that we lost?
So we, last weekend actually, September 27th, we experienced the first round of Metro cuts. There were, I believe, 10 routes in the city of Seattle that were just deleted, and we'll have to, I would check on that amount of bus services. So with this funding, we won't just be preventing cuts. So King County came back last week and found, they didn't find money. They'd made a decision to continue discussions in the budget process. This is a little confusing. Made a decision to hold off future cuts because in the budget process, sometime after the election, they have made the decision to dip into the reserves and make, in my opinion, a risky decision in holding off on bus cuts. What that means for this election is that if there were to be future cuts, this measure would preserve the Seattle routes, Seattle-only routes, and if there's not, any remaining funds will be used to expand bus service in the city. And then after that, there are some routes in the cuts that were just made that we can make targeted investments to bring back and ensure that King County is running an efficient agency. They made some decisions and moved some bus service around, so that they felt like they were compensating for that, but there are certainly some routes that were just cut that are having a big impact on certain neighborhoods and communities in the city. So those can be brought back in this process.
And this is another question from the audience. Does the council, and it doesn't say which council, either the county or the city, but I'm going to ask you both, do either of the councils, county or city, need to enact the entire package since it was based on the need to buy back service that was to be cut?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the incredible benefit of this measure, and very much thanks to the League of Women Voters, as there is a strong citizen oversight portion of this measure. So the city council at any time in the next 6 years in the duration of the measure could reduce the amount of funding that they generate. They'd have to hear that'll be a decision made through open public process after the election happens, as we're already voting on a set amount. So once that revenue is set, we can have conversations about with the oversight committee about how we want that revenue spent and how much do we want to be spending it on.
Okay. I'm going to let you give your most impassioned 2-minute speech to persuade us all.
Yeah.
Transportation Proposition 1.
The last item on your ballot. I thank you so much for having me here. It means a lot to be here. Transit is a vital service in our city. It's how seniors get around, it's how low-income people get around, it's how students and how people get to work, and why a huge reason why individuals decide to move to this city. In the course of time, transit has been seen as a very undervalued resource, and that is a problem. That's a problem for our growing city, and we need this to pass because we need to send the message that transit matters. We care about getting around, we care about our economy, and it is important to us to make this happen. So I appreciate you having me here. I don't think I need the whole 2 minutes. I think without having an opponent, I had more time to answer the questions. But this is a very, very important measure, and I really appreciate your support.
Sometimes brevity is the heart of clarity. Thank you very much for being with us, Abigail.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Allison will meet you halfway up. You get a mug. And if we could have Libby Carr and Jonathan Hopkins come up. Hello. Where is Libby? Well, you know something? We did actually have Libby scheduled at 8:30, and we're a little ahead of time. So she actually has 5 minutes to get here. We're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break if people would like to stretch their legs or visit the facility, and we'll start up at 8:30 like we have on our agenda. And what we're going to do for Plan B is our wonderful administrative manager, Allison Faher, is going to come up here with our simplified ballot summary. And we're going to give Jonathan 3 minutes to talk about his side, which is the no side on the monorail. Allison is going to read the submitted argument for the yes side from our ballot summaries, and then we're going to let Jonathan take some questions from you all, if you would like.
Okay, good evening. My name is Jonathan Hopkins. I'm the political director at a group called Seattle Subway. Really quickly, Seattle Subway is a group of people that in our spare time, we care about transportation so much in Seattle. We get together on weekends and go talk in public markets and help people see what the future could look like because we need to solve a lot of problems here, transportation-wise, right? And like we're essentially transit nerds that spend our spare time focused on this because we care a lot about it. Interestingly too, we're not opposed to monorails. I live right by Westlake Station. I ride the monorail to Seattle Center all the time. I love it, right? It's a great part of our history. It really is. That's got to stay there, right? The monorail to us is like cable cars in San Francisco, right? It's part of our heritage. That said, this effort to build a new one, we oppose, which is highly ironic. All the transportation groups in Seattle, save the monorail folks, actually do oppose this, right? And the reason is because it actually wastes money on something. It doesn't actually build anything, and the organization actually lacks enough credibility to actually believe they would build it, okay? And I can go into that in detail. One, it creates a new agency when we already have one. It'd be like creating 2 Washington State ferry systems, right? The second, and additionally, it has the added bureaucracy. There's a very costly learning curve. Both Sound Transit and the original monorail agency experienced that. Sound Transit barely survived, but they did. And the monorail agency originally failed a decade ago. And finally, they're not going for any federal matching funds. That's about half the cost of your project. Of billion-dollar projects could be covered by the feds, but they're not going for any. So they're asking Seattle taxpayers to actually pay more. Second, they don't actually build anything. Instead, this amount of money is $2 million that a self-appointed board that is going to serve for 13 months, the self-appointed board is going to be able to manage $2 million per year, there's no sunset on that, to study a corridor that's already been studied by Sound Transit to a very high quality with immense public input. We already know the corridors, the paths that the public wants to use most, but this one doesn't build anything. And finally, it lacks any sort of credibility. They claim a cost for this is almost exactly the same as the cost found 15 years ago. So they pretend inflation doesn't exist. And that original cost 15 years ago was for a very slimmed down system that didn't meet the needs of Seattle. We lost $125 million last time trying to do this, and then they want to repeat this again. And they kind of know this because Libby Carr, who apparently wasn't able to make it tonight, she says in the West Seattle Herald that 10 years ago we tried this and failed, but this time it just might work. We have alternatives here. It's to build Sound Transit 3. They will start building if we vote on it in 2016. We know when we give them money, they build it. This group, we don't know if we give them money, what will happen.
Thank you. And Allison, if you could read the pre-submitted advocacy statement from the monorail folks.
Okay, so the arguments for a yes vote on the monorail proposition. Monorails are an efficient form of mass transit that gets the trains above roads and out of traffic so that both road and monorail traffic move more smoothly and efficiently during rush hours. An elevated monorail can accommodate the unique terrain of Seattle better and can be built faster with lower construction costs than light rail on the ground. Monorails can be constructed to seamlessly intersect with light rail lines and buses at transit centers. A monorail system is particularly suitable for the first proposed line, the Ballot to West Seattle route, as these neighborhoods will be impacted by the change from viaduct to tunnel on State Route 99, and there are no existing plans for rail mass transit to serve this route. A monorail remains the most efficient and adaptable form of rail transportation for our region. This monorail proposal should not be judged by the last project's funding problems, where incorrect data supplied by public agencies impacted the budget for construction. That mistake would be avoided due to heightened public transparency built into this plan.
And so that was the statement they submitted to us when we requested a pro statement. Is there anything you wish to rebut about that statement, Mr. Hopkins?
Okay, so I'm just going to go through this point by point. One, they state a preference for being above roads. Monorails aren't flexible. They want to do it, and this plan is not flexible. They want to do it just above roads. There's times where you want it underground. Actually, on the Ballot, the downtown to Ballard line that Sound Transit studied, they had 5 options. One was above ground on the same corridor that this group wants, and another one of the 5 was below ground through downtown under Queen Anne, to Fremont, and then to Ballard. Out of 5 options, 76% of the residents that would use that line preferred the below-ground option. This group prevents us from doing what people want most. Next, they say it's cheaper. It's cheaper if you don't build trains large enough to accommodate the number of people you need to move. You know, like having a car is cheaper than driving a bus. It's the same difference, right? So when you look at systems of the similar size trains on monorail and similar size for like link trains, for example, there's no financial benefit to doing a monorail. About the only difference is monorails can't turn as tight and switching is more difficult. That gets really wonky, but it's just like there's these couple things that really aren't beneficial. And for the ride, like Sound Transit does elevated lines. Do the riders really care whether they're riding on one rail or 2? It shouldn't make a difference. Does it get them there quickly and safely? That's really what matters. They say that this line could intersect with existing Sound Transit lines, but unfortunately in their proposal it does not, right? The Sound Transit, like light rail and the bus tunnel is on 4th and 5th Avenue, right? And this goes down along the waterfront. Imagine if you're in Ballard and you want to go to the airport, right? You take your big luggage, you get on the monorail, and you get off down on Alaska Way, walk through the park, go up the hill with your luggage, and then get on a different train 4 blocks away. That's going to diminish ridership. It's not creating a seamless transportation system. It should be like New York or DC, where you just get off the train, walk through a little corridor, and get on another train. Anybody can do that, no matter your ability, your age, or what's going on. It should serve everyone. And finally, I think I just covered all the points.
Okay. And I think since we don't have an opponent, we'll just go ahead if you'd like to give us 1 minute on why we should vote no on the monorail measure. Can you think of anything new?
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, fundamentally, we're asking to set up a near bureaucracy. I don't know if I said it before because I've said it a few times today. It'd be like creating 2 Washington State ferry systems side by side, running the same routes. All you've created is more overhead, and that's an immense amount of cost. And then you're going to add to that the costs of planning failures, and add to that the cost of not using federal funds. Keep in mind, we're really on a path to repeat the mistakes. Like, here's how you build a failed transportation agency. You lowball the cost. You say it's only $2 billion when it's really going to be 4 or 5. That's what happened last time. You create an unnecessary agency that's going to cost more. You don't work with anybody else because they have not, right? They have not. They're not working with anybody. You use a technology that's pretty much used nowhere else except for amusement parks. And then you present an option to the people, say, give us $2 million a year, and maybe, this is their words, not mine, it just maybe might work. This is their words in the West Seattle Herald. We know, like, the recession took some money away from Sound Transit, but if they get the money, they build it. And just one last point on Sound Transit, they do it right. We worry about Big Bertha and stuff like that. That has nothing to do with Sound Transit. They've built 7 tunnels. Every single one of them has been on time and on budget, except for University Link. It's not on time or on budget. It's actually 6 to 9 months early and $150 to $200 million under budget. That's the sort of government agency that we want and need to be able to support. Right? I'm not affiliated with Sound Transit, but count me among the 69% of people that live in the Sound Transit district that approve of what they're doing, because they are doing great work. And to create another agency that has huge hazards of failures, creating transit agencies in Seattle, we have a 50% batting average. We bat 500, right? So this next one has a 50% chance of surviving if they vote for this. It's just a dark alley that we don't want to go down. It's kind of like a bad nightmare from our history. I like monorails, like we have a nice one, but we also like streetcars. They're a neat part of our heritage, but we're not building any more. I like cable cars. They're a neat part of our heritage, but we're not building cable cars right now. We're building what's done every place else and making it work well. I'm happy to answer any questions that people have.
Super. Does anybody have any questions?
So, we love to talk about this because Sound Transit and the City of Seattle together studied the Ballard to downtown corridor. They studied Ballard to the University District, which, like 45th is terrible, right? If you ride the 44 as a bus, getting a couple miles in 45 minutes is really not mass rapid transit at all, right? And then West Seattle, which is constrained. I mean, Seattle's really 3/4 of an island, right? You have water on 3 sides. So they studied West Seattle as well. And a very comprehensive study. They know how much the ridership on all of these corridors, including West Seattle, are going to be. They know what the cost is going to be. They've looked at lines that go through West Seattle to White Center to Burien and then on to Renton. And they've looked at like 5 different options in each corridor. They are ready to build. What is going on with them is they have a best practices process because they've been through this a lot. So they are going to analyze what they can put on the ballot in 2016, and then we can vote on it in 2016. On that ballot will most assuredly have West Seattle and Ballard. It might even have Ballard crosstown to the University District, between one of the fastest growing parts of the city to the city's biggest employer. All of these, Sound Transit knows how to do this. They've done 7 tunnels. They are a capital projects agency that builds things well that are going to last us a century. And that's what they do. They build stuff. And then, the buses that drive around that are really nice with the waves on them, like those are run by Metro and Pierce Transit, Community Transit. They outsource the operations and they focus on building stuff. They know how to do it because they've all these lessons from the 1990s, right? And they do it right and they get it done.
That's a great question. Thank you. And Ellen, if you'd like to come up and wrap up, I want to thank Mr. Hopkins for coming here tonight and talking to us about the monorail.
Wait for your lovely mug.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank you all for coming, and I hope you found it helpful. Also hope that you'll go home and tell all your friends how educational these League of Women Voters forums are, and encourage them to come to the next one. I want to thank Betty Sullivan for baking the yummy cookies over there. I think they're gone. Thank Julianne for putting this all together, getting the speakers, the questions, and moderating, of course. And thank Allison for all her hard work behind the scenes and even stepping in when someone doesn't show up. So thank you again. Have a good evening.